Football is just a few weeks away, so today we are going to look through every team's schedules in the AFC and NFC South, predicting their records game by game. Should be tons of fun to see who can finish where, as you'll find out very quickly. One of these divisions was relatively close throughout the entire year, and the other one is a punching bag for the rest of the league. I think it won't be hard to figure out which division is which. But if you like sports podcasts, this is the page for you. This is the channel for you, as we drop 2 sports podcasts a week, every Tuesday and Thursday. And we also drop 2 fantasy football episodes every Wednesday and Friday. So we drop very consistent, high-quality videos. All I ask for is that if you enjoyed any point, support us down below. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel, even share the podcast with a friend. That would be greatly appreciated. But without further ado, this is the Anomaly Podcast. This is Owen. Let's dive into Jacksonville's schedule. All right, like I mentioned, we're going to start here in Duval, and if you followed the channel at all in this offseason, you know that I'm a big Jacksonville believer this year, and this schedule will reflect that. Starting on the road, week 1 into Indianapolis against the former first-round pick, I guess one of the top quarterbacks out of this past draft, Anthony Richardson. As a Gators fan, on one hand, I'm excited for Anthony Richardson in his NFL career. But on the other, I know he is very raw, and he's going to need a lot of time to develop, and I think he's going to show those rookie growing pains against a very formidable Jacksonville defense. Jacksonville, to me, a Super Bowl contender. They open up their year with a win here on the road in Indy against a very raw quarterback. But then they go home. They go home to Duval Nation, and they take on the Kansas City Chiefs, a potential playoff matchup here. I'm going to give the edge to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs have been there. They've done that. They're a more veteran team. I think they get the edge there in Jacksonville, as Jacksonville is there, maybe just not on the level of Kansas City. Then they come back home against Houston, a very young team, C.J. Stroud. This is only going to be his 3rd career game at this point. I think Jacksonville should be able to take care of business there, as C.J. Stroud is still trying to get his feet wet at this point in the season. But then primetime game. I believe this game is in London, home technically against the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons, you'll see later on in the video, I believe they are at least a playoff team, if not on the brink of the playoffs. So a lot of people love Atlanta this year, and I see the hype behind it. However, Jacksonville to me is a way better team as of now. As of 2023, they are a better team. So I will take Jacksonville at home, 3-1 after 4 weeks. But then another primetime game. This time, technically, again, home against the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo, they were a top 6 seed last year, or top 6 team last year, excuse me. Buffalo, they have aspirations to be back in the Super Bowl contention picture this year yet again. I think I'm going to give the edge to the Buffalo Bills here. So after 5 weeks in the year, Jacksonville has won the games they're supposed to, but they haven't won that big game yet. They haven't won a game against a team that many look at as a serious playoff team. So that's going to be a narrative here early in the year for Duval. But then they're back at home against Indianapolis. They pick up a win for the same reasons as week 1. At New Orleans in a primetime game, week 7, I think they win that game. New Orleans is a veteran team. Derek Carr, it's a new-look Saints team. However, I like Jacksonville a lot better than the New Orleans Saints. Give me Jacksonville there. And then week 8 at Pittsburgh. If you watched Tuesday's video, you would know the answer to this. But I'm going to give the edge to Jacksonville at Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's a very good team. I think Pittsburgh finishes at 9-8, if not better. So, however, I do think that Jacksonville's a guaranteed playoff team, unlike the Pittsburgh Steelers. Give me Jacksonville at home, or on the road, week 8. And at week 9, that's their bye week. And at that point in the year, the midseason mark, they are a good 6-2 record. But again, they haven't faced that Super Bowl contender team, or they haven't beat a Super Bowl contender team, So that's going to be the question at the midseason mark is, okay, they've won the games they're supposed to, but can they win that big game? And they have a big one in week 10 against the San Francisco 49ers. Let's see if they can win that one. I don't believe so. Even though they're home against the San Francisco 49ers, the San Francisco 49ers were a quarterback away from making the Super Bowl last year. They're coming back maybe better than ever with Brock Purdy having another year under him. So he's going to look a lot more comfortable. And at this point in the season, this is where San Fran usually turns up and they start to win a lot of games. This is the second half of the year. And if they can be healthy, I mean, they might be the best team in football. They're going to take another loss here to San Fran, even though they aren't at home in Jacksonville. So still, 10 weeks in, they haven't beat a Super Bowl contender. Week 11, home against the Tennessee Titans. I'm not a big Tennessee believer. Give me Jacksonville. Week 12 at Houston. I could see a potential upset here. At this point in the year, CJ Stroud has 12 weeks under him. He's a little bit more comfortable at this point, at least you would assume. This could be a potential upset where Houston does win this game. However, give me Jacksonville on the road to sweep the Houston Texans. Then week 13, another primetime game against the Cincinnati Bengals. If you watched Tuesday's podcast, Cincinnati is my Super Bowl favorite this year. I think they take a loss. I think Jacksonville takes a loss. So again, 13 weeks in, still haven't won that big game. Week 14 at Cleveland, they win there, as that would be a game Cleveland should make interesting. However, as a Browns fan, I think even though we're home, Jacksonville should probably come in and beat us there. Week 15, their final primetime game of the season at home against Baltimore. Some would say Baltimore is a Super Bowl contender. I wouldn't go that far, and for that reason, I think Jacksonville wins at home against a team that I don't want to predict injuries, but most likely Baltimore will have a couple at this point in the year. Week 16 at Tampa, that's not a conversation. Jacksonville's going to take that one. Week 17, at this point, this team only has 4 losses. They are contending for the number 1 seed in the AFC, and they're rolling. 3 straight wins against 3 okay opponents. And then you're home against Carolina. Let's take care of business against the number 1 seed, go into week 18, and maybe get the number 1 seed. However, I think this is an upset to look out for. I think Bryce Young, the number 1 pick from this past offseason, I think he's going to get a win here. Week 17 on the road in Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville, this is kind of a wake-up call where, hey, we're a contender, but, we got a little ahead of ourselves, ahead of this Week 18 game where our focus was there and not on the team in front of us, And I think Carolina goes into Jacksonville and picks up an upset win here late in the season. And then Week 18 at Tennessee, they close out with a win. That's only because at this point they would still be playing their starters. They would be playing for a seeding at this point. So you got to play your guys. But if they win Week 17, they might be in a position to get the 1 seeder. They might have it locked up at that point. And if that is the case, obviously the starters want to play in Week 18. But in this scenario, the starters would have to play in Week 18 for seeding reasons. However, I think an overall 12-5 finish for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I do believe this team is a dark horse Super Bowl contender. And I think this record reflects that. They're a 6-0 record in their division. They sweep everybody in their division. They're a 3-2 record in primetime games. And aside from the upset loss to Carolina late in the year their losses are to teams that were in the top 4 last year, or the top 5 of last year. All right, Buffalo, they were a second-round exit, but they were a Super Bowl contender in a lot of people's eyes. Kansas City, San Fran, and Cincy were all teams that were in the Final 4 of last year. So Jacksonville, their losses come to very formidable opponents, but going into the playoffs, there's going to be the questions, can they beat a really good team? That's going to be the biggest question for Jacksonville. But I do believe in Doug Peterson and the Trevor Lawrence connection, as there was a stat I saw the other day, as Trevor Lawrence went from a passer rating of 71.9 in his rookie year to 95.2 in his second year, which was last year. That jump was the biggest jump in NFL history from a year 1 to year 2 quarterback. And that's what happens when you go from Urban Meyer to Doug Peterson. Their connection is special, and they've only added to this offense this offseason with the addition of Calvin Ridley, who looks better than ever this offseason. But with the weak division, I wouldn't rule out a MVP level year from Trevor Lawrence. Should be a very interesting year. But the Jags, they finished as the top 3 AFC seed. But before we move on, I just want to say, stay to the end of this video as we're going to recap this division. And I have a very interesting stat to throw out there about this AFC South. But moving over to, I believe, the Houston Texans. And that is true. And I'm just going to preface by saying this. For these next 3 teams, you're going to see a lot of red. So if red's your favorite color, this is going to be your favorite part of the video. However, you're going to see a lot of red because a lot of these next 3 teams have a young quarterback, and they're just a year away from taking that next step, in my opinion. Sure, should these teams go out there and win 7, 8, 9 games? Sure, that is a possibility. However, I don't see it as of this year for these bottom 3 teams in the AFC South. And starting here with the Texans, they have the number 2 overall pick in C.J. Stroud making his debut. They have the number 3 overall pick in Will Anderson, in which they traded up for. They have a first-year head coach in D'Amico Ryans, a first-year head coaching staff really all around. So this team is young, and I think this is going to be a year of development from the coaching staff to the players. And I think that's going to be more so the focus this year than winning ball games, if that makes any sense. And I think they're going to be in a lot of games this year for the Houston Texans. But with the experience, the lack of, I should say, they might not be able to finish the games. Regardless, you see here in Week 1, at Baltimore, loss. Week 2, they bounce back with a win at home against Indy. And then, boom, they're 1-1, right? So there's still promise after Week 2. They're 1-1. But then they have a tough stretch. At Jacksonville, that's a loss. Home against Pittsburgh. They have TJ Watt. That's all I should say there. That's a loss. At Atlanta, very promising team. That's a loss. And then home against New Orleans. New Orleans at this point needs a win, and they go out there and get it. So this team is 1-5 at their bye week in Week 7. They're struggling, but hey, there's a lot of time to turn it around with a rookie quarterback. I just don't believe it happens. At Carolina after the bye, I think Carolina gets the edge in the matchup of the number 1 and 2 overall picks. Tampa Bay in Week 9. That was a toss-up. I think Houston has the potential to win that game against Tampa, but Tampa is a little bit more of a veteran team, and Todd Bowles might be a little bit better than D'Amico Ryans as of right now. So with the coaching advantage, the experience advantage, I gave the advantage to Tampa in that Week 9 game. The second half of the season doesn't get much better. At Cincy in Week 10, obviously, that is a loss. Home against Arizona. I gave this to the Texans regardless of if Kyler Murray decides to play that game or if he's healthy by then to play at that point. And even if Kyler if this is his first game back, Kyler, I think, super underrated as a quarterback. But if this is his first game back, it's not easy just to jump back into NFL action. So if that is the case, I do think he's going to need a week or two to get back up to speed. So I think regardless of if he plays or not, that is a win for the Houston Texans. Then they lose 5 straight to the Jags, the Denver Broncos, the Jets, Tennessee Titans, and the Cleveland Browns, as they again don't get their advantage or their revenge on Deshaun Watson. Week 17, I do have them getting a win, bouncing back against the Titans, splitting their season series. But then they close off the year with a loss to the Indianapolis Colts. A lot of these divisional games, that's where you're going to find your wins for the Houston Texans. They just so happen to have Arizona on their schedule to pick up another win. Regardless, I think this team is going to show a lot of promise this year. Aside from their record, I hope that they bring D'Amico Ryans back. I hope they bring this coaching staff back for another year. And this team, regardless of if they're 3-14, they will still have the Cleveland Browns first-round pick. So they're going to be bad, but they're going to show promise, and they still get to add to this young core with a higher draft pick next season. So you show promise, you get to add to this young core with a young player. Sounds like a win-win of a season for me if you're a Houston Texans fan, even though that 3-14 record looks horrendous. Moving over to the Colts, it doesn't get much better. The first 4 weeks of the year I have marked down as a loss. Jacksonville, Houston, Baltimore, and the Rams. The Rams is a toss-up, but I gave the edge to the veteran team there and the better coach in Sean McVay and that Rams team. But week 5, this team and Anthony Richardson finally get their win. As the first month of the year, everyone's like, hey, Anthony Richardson, he's too raw. He's not ready for prime time. He needs time to develop, and that's what we've all been screaming, at least here as Gators fans. But week 5, home against Tennessee, I think that game is a toss-up, and they win that one. So shout out to Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen. They finally get that monkey off their back. They get their first win together. But then week 6 at Jacksonville, they're back on the losing side of things. Jacksonville, of course, is a very, very good team this year in my opinion. Week 7, they go play against Cleveland, the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns maybe have a top 5 most talented roster in the league. A new coaching staff there in Cleveland, or at least a new D coordinator. Cleveland should be good this year. I think they're 10-7, and I have them beating this Indianapolis Colts team. Week 8, home against the Saints. The Saints, they're just a better team. I'm giving the edge to the Saints. In week 9 against the Panthers. Same song and dance here as the Texans. I think, battle between the two young quarterbacks. The first-round pick, Anthony Richardson, and the first-round pick, Bryce Young. Carolina just has a more complete team. Give me Carolina there in week 9. So through 9 weeks, they're 1-8. Not a lot of promise shown here, and it doesn't get a lot better. week 10, against the New England Patriots. Bill Belichick is licking his chops with this game. He loves to play young quarterbacks, and he loves to terrorize them, is a way to put it. Bill Belichick and the Patriots, regardless of if it's Mac Jones, Bailey Zapp, or if Ramondre Stevenson plays quarterback, I think New England gets that win. So heading into their Week 11 bye, they're 1-9, not showing any promise this season. But and again, I think this is a team that could be just in a lot of games. They have the offensive line, so they could be in a lot of games, but they just might not be able to finish the deal late in them. But coming out of the bye, they're going and they're playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Same song and dance as the Texans. This is a toss-up. They can beat the Tampa Bay Bucs. But for the Colts' sake, I'm going to give the edge to the Bucs, and I'll explain here in a minute. Then they go at Tennessee and at Cincy in Week 13 and 14. Those are 2 losses. Week 15 against Pittsburgh, that's a loss. Week 16 at Atlanta, that's a loss. And Week 17, home against the Las Vegas Raiders. Depending on who is the quarterback for the Raiders at that point in the year, whether if it's Jimmy G or another guy, I think if it's not Jimmy G, that game could swing in the Colts' favor. But I'm going to say it's Jimmy G, and I'm going to say the Colts go down in that one. And then Week 18, home against the Texans, I have the Colts picking up another pity win late in the season. But again, I think this is a part of this prediction for the Colts. And you might run to the comment section and say, hey, you don't know football because I'm a Colts fan. However, let me explain, and this might make some sense to you. A part of this prediction is my hope for this Colts team this year, as this team has a young quarterback that has talent around that young quarterback, but the quarterback is super raw, and he needs a lot more time under his belt to develop at the highest level. He's going to show promise this year. We're talking about Anthony Richardson. And I think you're going to see him maybe as your next franchise guy. But with a guy like Jonathan Taylor, after next season, most likely either getting traded or signed elsewhere, they're going to need some more dynamic weapons in this offense. And I think going into this draft next year, this next NFL draft, there's a lot of playmakers. So it's not going to be all bad that this record is 2-15. You get to add to this offense despite having a terrible record and losing a top 10 level running back in the NFL. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of good wide receivers in this next year's draft, but there's really only one option for this Colts team, and that narrows their options. But this is maybe the best college football player in the world right now, as this wide receiver's father, he played for the Colts, and he was a part of the highest scoring quarterback and wide receiver duo of all time. He's a Hall of Fame level player to my knowledge, and his son, the guy we're talking about here, is on a college football powerhouse. He's in the Big Ten, and he might be the best player in college football. He might be the best. He might be the number 1 overall pick next year at the wide receiver position. That guy goes by the name of Marvin Harrison Jr. Some of you guys may know his father. He was a legend there with Peyton Manning in Indianapolis. I think he fits perfectly, and he has the timeline. He has the bloodline, quote unquote, here in this Colts organization. I think he comes in and he fits perfectly in this offense next to Michael Pittman, next to Josh Downs, to this talented offensive line, and of course, a year 2 at that point, Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen to lead the way, as Shane Steichen's an offensive mastermind. So I think that it just makes too much sense, and it's only a matter of time before Marvin Harrison, just like his father, suits up for the Colts and becomes one of the next great wide receivers we have here in the NFL. That's a lot of future thinking, and I know we have a full 18-game season before we even think about next offseason. However, I think it's a year of development for the Colts, and it's not a bad thing to think, hey, how can we give our young quarterback some help, especially with Jonathan Taylor leaving after next season. But again, a year for development for the Colts, 2-15 finish. Moving over to the Tennessee Titans, and I might get some heat for this, but I just don't see the potential with the Tennessee Titans. I do believe this year they're going to have a carousel of quarterbacks play at some point, unless this team comes out and wins 13, 14 games or something outrageous of that sort. And I'm not going to put it past Mike Vrabel, because he is a top 5 coach in this league. However, the talent on his roster, it's mediocre at best, and I don't really see a part of this. I'll say this. A part of this is, again, my hope for this Titans organization. So we'll get into it here. Week 1, I think they open up with a win against the Saints, the new-look Saints with Derek Carr at the helm. I think even though they're on the road in New Orleans, they pick up a win behind Derrick Henry and the new addition in DeAndre Hopkins. Maybe if Treylon Burks is back, he can have a big game there for this Tennessee offense. But then they go on a bit of a drought. They go into Los Angeles to take on the Chargers. They lose that one. And then they go into Cleveland to take on the Browns. They lose that one. And then they play Cincinnati at home. They're going to lose that one. So after winning week 1, you lose 3 straight. You're looking to bounce back. But then in week 5 at Indianapolis, I have Anthony Richardson having his first breakout game, quote unquote, and they lose that one. So for the first 4 weeks, you're like, okay, we lost to some good playoff teams, but we also beat one. Maybe we can get back on track. But then you lose to a young quarterback in his first career win. It's demoralizing for a veteran team like the Titans. But then you play the Baltimore Ravens on primetime, week 6, week before your bye week, trying to get back on track. Trying to get on the right track is a way to put it. They lose that one as well. Baltimore at that point, assuming full health, is a very formidable team. And going into their bye week, I think Tennessee is a 1-5 ball club, and that might be shocking. But I think aside from Indy, they are probably going to lose all of these games. Coming out of the bye week, maybe they can get back on track. But then they play Atlanta. Atlanta has everything. It all depends on Desmond Ridder, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But I think if Desmond Ridder can be at least a game manager at best, this team is going to be a playoff team this year. It's going to be a playoff level team. And if that is the case, I'm going to give the edge to Atlanta over there, over Tennessee. But I wouldn't doubt a win here at home for Tennessee, as Arthur Smith comes from the branch of Mike Vrabel. I could definitely see a win there for Tennessee. But I'm going to give the edge to the younger team there in Atlanta. Again, this is a part of my hope for the Tennessee organization. And then week 9 at Pittsburgh in primetime, I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think I've ever seen the Titans beat the Steelers in my lifetime, but I'm sure I'm completely wrong on that as well. Moving over to the second half of the season, week 10 at Tampa, they get a win there. So maybe, okay, we were, what were we, 1-7 in the first half of the year. Maybe we can spark some magic like the Detroit Lions last year and get on the right track. However, after that win in Tampa, they go to Jacksonville. And Jacksonville, as you've heard 100 times already this episode, I believe in them this year. I think Tennessee loses that game. Carolina, week 12, at this point, we might be looking at a Will Levis first game, right? We might be looking at week 12. If they're 2-10 or whatever they are at this point, they might be like, hey, it's time for a change. Tannehill is on his way out the door. We have a young guy waiting for his opportunity. Let's see what we have in Will Levis for a couple weeks. Let's see what we have in Malik Willis for a couple weeks, and then we can make a decision on our quarterback in the offseason. At this point, and if with that being said, I think if Will Levis' first career start is against the Carolina Panthers, a defense led by Brian Burns, one of the most underrated defensive edges here in the NFL, I'm going to go with the Carolina Panthers. So Tennessee's going to lose that one after the quarterback change. And then week 13, Will Levis gets his first career win against Anthony Richardson in week 13 at home with the home crowd behind him. His first career win comes up against a division foe. Week 14, primetime game at Miami. If Will Levis is the starter, this game would definitely not be a primetime game. It would be flexed out. Regardless, Miami wins that one at home against this Tennessee club. Week 15, they get their final win of the season, home against the Houston Texans. Whether if it's Malik Willis or Will Levis, I think the Tennessee team can get their final win here, because to close out the year, they play Seattle. Seattle's a borderline playoff team in a lot of people's eyes. Then they're home against Houston. That's a loss there. I'll say they split with Houston. And then they go to Jacksonville. Now, Jacksonville, again, if Jacksonville is in a position for the 1 seed and they have it locked up, or if they're in the playoff run and the playoff seeding and they're locked at the 2nd position or the 3rd position and they don't need to play starters in this last game, I can see another win for this Tennessee team. But assuming what I have down, Jacksonville is going to need to play their starters for at least a decent part of this game, and Tennessee is going to lose here pretty handily. 4-13 finish. Just like Houston and Indianapolis, This is my hope for them, as it's not like I want to see a talented coach like Mike Vrabel or a player like Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins or even this fan base lose. But sometimes I think you just need to take one step back to take two forward, as that's a very popular saying. But you have a very talented roster, but you're just lacking at the most important position. And as of now, there's going to be a couple good options in next year's draft class, headlined, of course, by the next Patrick Mahomes, as some would say, in Caleb Williams, quarterback out of USC. So sure, they should win more games this year. They should win 7, 8, 9 games. But I don't know if that's the smartest move for this franchise, as they're barely a playoff team, let alone a Super Bowl contender. So just take one step back to take 5, 6 steps forward if you do get your hands on a guy like Caleb Williams. Again, stay to the end of the video. I'm going to talk about this division here as they make history. Even though you see a lot of red and a lot of losses, they make some history here. So we'll get back to that in just a moment. Moving over to the NFC South, finally. And Bryce Young, the number 1 overall pick, is set to start for this team. He's going to make his debut as the starter for the Panthers, and he's surrounded by new coaches and playmakers in this offseason. So the Panthers have done a lot to surround their young quarterback, whoever that would have been, and of course it turned out to be the Alabama prodigy in Bryce Young. I think they open up the season at Atlanta. Bryce Young's first career game. He's facing a really good defense there in Atlanta. They're going to struggle. Rookie struggles. Bryce Young is going to fall short. Maybe it's a close game. Maybe they lose on a field goal on the road. But regardless, I think they do drop that one in week 1. But then he bounced back. Bryce Young shows, hey, I'm the number 1 pick for a reason. I'm a former Heisman winner for a reason. I'm one of the guys that some would say I was better than Joe Burrow at one point for a reason, because they're going to bounce back on the road in primetime in New Orleans, and they're going to win that game against the Saints. As the Saints, again, they have some adjustment period as well with Derek Carr at the helm now, and Carolina's going to take advantage of that. Week 3 at Seattle. This is controversial because you're going into Seattle against the 12th man, a very competent team there in Seattle. But I think you're going to win that one as well. So 2-1 after 3 weeks, picking up 2 big wins against NFC opponents. But then you go on a bit of a slide, as maybe the ego gets in the way for the young team there in Carolina. They lose 1 to Minnesota. Then they go into Detroit. They lose that one against Detroit. And then week 6, they play in Miami. Three playoff teams, first off. But they lose all 3 of those games. And heading into their week 7 bye, they are 2-4. There's some questions going on around this team. Is Bryce Young really, is he really ready? Does he need more time to develop? Can he lead a team? Do we need more talent around him? Should we make a big trade? A lot of questions are going to be going on in Carolina. But I think he shuts those rumors down a little bit as he picks up a win against Houston and Indianapolis. This team is an even 4-4 at the midseason mark, and you can't ask for much more. They're in a position to make the playoffs at this point in their division. But then week 10, primetime against the Bears. I do have the Bears winning this one, as the Bears, they should be pushing for a playoff spot just like this Panthers team. But they have a little bit more veteranship, and Justin Fields in year 2 should be a lot better through the air. So I'm going to give the edge to Chicago in Chicago, right? Week 10. Week 11 versus the Dallas Cowboys. And even though I despise Mike McCarthy, I'm going to give the edge to Dallas, as they could very easily win the NFC East. So I think they can take advantage of the Carolina Panthers. Week 12 at Tennessee. That's a win for Carolina. And then at Tampa Bay in week 13. This was controversial. I debated, hey, should I have Carolina sweeping the Tampa Bay Bucks? Because at this point, the Tampa Bay Bucks, we'll talk about it here in a sec. They might have Kyle Trask starting at this point in the year. But I did want to, I just went with a split. I went with a split. Let's go. Carolina's going to lose at Tampa here in week 13. They're going to lose in New Orleans week 14. They're going to split there with New Orleans. Week 15, they lose to Atlanta. So Atlanta sweeps the Carolina Panthers this season. But then week 16, can they get back on track? They lost 3 straight. They want to make a playoff push. Then they lose home against the Green Bay Packers. I think Jordan Love is going to be a lot better than people think this year. And then week 17 at Jacksonville. This is the controversial one. This team has lost 4 games in a row. This team is no longer in playoff contention. And this team has looked like they have a number 1 overall pick as their starting quarterback. So week 17, I think, the ego gets in the way of Jacksonville. Like I mentioned earlier, Carolina, one of the biggest upsets of the year at this point. I think they go into Jacksonville, and I think they go into Florida, and they win that game to shock the world and maybe, kind of screw Jacksonville when it comes to seeding. And then week 18, I think they build off that momentum and finish off the year strong with a win, assumingly against Kyle Trask and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, overall, 7-10 record. Bryce Young shows why he was the number 1 overall pick. He shows he's going to be one of the next great young quarterbacks in this league. And even though this team is 1-1 in prime time, they're 2-4 in their division, I think they do also get some quality wins along the way to their credit with wins against Jacksonville, New Orleans, and Seattle. This team shows promise. Frank Reich, the new head coach of this team, throughout his entire career as a head coach, he's always been a quarterback whisperer, as that term is thrown around. But I think he does it yet again with a guy like Bryce Young. And not that Bryce Young needs a lot of help, but I think Frank Reich can take him to another level in his rookie year. Now, I don't know if Frank Reich's going to be the guy to take this team over the top when that time comes to compete for a Super Bowl. But for now, I think he's going to be a very good coach to develop this team to get to that point, if that makes any sense. I think Bryce Young's going to be in the running for the Rookie of the Year this year, especially if they win their division. Should be a very fun year regardless, and I wouldn't rule out maybe a Panthers playoff appearance as this division is wide open. But for now, I'm going to go with a 7-10 record, just a year or a move away for this Panthers club. Moving over to the Atlanta Falcons, we've talked about them a lot here indirectly, but there's a lot of hype around this team, and it all starts with their second-year quarterback, Desmond Ridder, guy out of Cincinnati formerly. But also, surprisingly, this team, with all the hype around them, only has one primetime game this year. Now, it is against Jacksonville, a very good team, and it is overseas, so that's something. But only one primetime game for a team that has a lot of hype. It's just a bit surprising when a team like Green Bay has 6 of them. Regardless, moving over here to week 1, I think they start off the year hot. They win at home against Carolina. Then they win against Green Bay at home in week 2. Off to a hot start. But then they mellow out a little bit. At Detroit in week 3, they drop that one. And then week 4 I think technically overseas. So they're on the road technically against Jacksonville. And I think they're going to lose that one as Jacksonville can finally get an overseas win. And even though Kyle Pitts seems to always do better not on American soil. So if you have Kyle Pitts, week 4, you're guaranteed a touchdown. I just don't think Atlanta will be ready for a team like Jacksonville here in 2023. So 2-2 after 4 weeks. You're mediocre. You're not the best start, not the worst start. That's a good place to be. Week 5 at home against Houston. They win against Houston. Week 6 versus Washington at home. A lot of home games here in these first couple games for them. They lose that one, and that one's controversial. Depends on who's the quarterback, but I think as early as week 6, we might already see Jacoby Brissett take over if this Washington team wants to make the playoffs. If that is the case, I think Atlanta will win this, but ego could also get in the way, and they could say, hey, we're facing Sam Howell. He's a first-year quarterback, really, and they shouldn't beat us. Ego can get in the way, and at the end of the day, this is the NFL. The Washington Commanders have one of the most talented defensive fronts. That can always alter a game in itself. Week 7 at Tampa, they bounce back with a win. Week 8 at Tennessee, they win that one as well. Week 9 on the road against Minnesota, they drop that one. So at the midseason mark, they are a 5-4 record, in a very good spot to make the playoffs, and it only gets better. Starting in week 10 on the second half of the schedule, they pick up a win at Arizona. As you can tell, I don't have Arizona winning many games this year. So at their bye week, they are 6-4, probably leading their division at this point. Week 12, after the bye week, I think they keep their mojo going. They beat New Orleans at home. But then week 13 is a very questionable game, and I think this is a game to highlight as maybe a potential game of the year. No clue why, right? I think Atlanta and the New York Jets are in two similar situations is the way to put it. But Atlanta at this point would be 7-4 going into New York to take on the Jets. The Jets want to make the playoffs. They want to win the Super Bowl. They have high aspirations. And at this point, there'd be a lot of noise behind Atlanta. So it'd be a very fun game to watch there in Week 13. But I will give the edge to Aaron Rodgers over Desmond Ridder. And the Jets have a very good coach and a very good defense as well. So the home field advantage only plays a bigger part into that. So I think maybe on the road they take a loss there. But they get back on track. After the veteran loss to the New York Jets, they beat Tampa, they beat Carolina, and they beat Indy. 3 teams that have quarterback issues or just young quarterbacks. They take advantage of all 3 teams, and they pick up the wins. In Week 17, at this point, this team is 10-5. So you have a potential to be a 12-5 ball club if you're Atlanta this year. You haven't seen those marks since Matt Ryan and Julio Jones were in town. But I think they finished on a bit of a cold spell, and it puts the division in question. As in Week 17 at Chicago, they lose that one, Chicago at that point, they start to get things going, maybe make some noise. I forget where I had Chicago finishing, but they lose that one at Chicago in Soldier Field, and then they lose Week 18 against the New Orleans Saints. So we could honestly switch Week 12 and Week 18 regardless. I will tell you how I believe this division should finish here in just a moment. But Atlanta, 10-7 record. And again, it might finally be the year for Atlanta to return to the playoffs. They have the talent on the roster. They have the continuity with the coaching staff, a wide open division. Everything is there for this team to be a dominant 12-5 team this year, as we just saw. But I think this team showed their cards last year. They're going to be a running offense, a run-focused offense, and that's an understatement here for how much they ran the ball. But they showed that their scheme can work offensively, and they only did everything to improve that this offseason, as they most notably brought in a guy by the name of Bijan Robinson, running back out of Texas, and he is a very fun player to watch, as he can do a little bit of everything there on the football field. But this team, they also surefired their defensive secondary, as that was their biggest question last year. But they brought in a perennial Pro Bowler in Jesse Bates to command that defensive secondary, and they should be a lot better on that side of the ball, as well as they have also one of the best corners in the league there in A.J. Terrell to always lock down the other team's top receiver. So they filled all the holes on this team. I think it's just time to put it together. And again, it all relies on Desmond Ridder and his improvement from year 1 to year 2, especially in a run-heavy scheme. When it's time to put the ball in the air, can Desmond Ridder do that for this Atlanta offense, and can he do it effectively? That's going to be the question, but 10-7 finish, still a very good year for the Atlanta Falcons. Moving over to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a lot of red. It looks like a bad Christmas is a way to put it. But first 4 weeks of the year, I'll make this one quick. I think they lose all 4 games. Going into their bye week, week 4, they are 0-4. We might see a quarterback change as soon as week 6 for this Tampa Bay team. But I'm going to say Baker he's going to start until week, I'll give him the first half of the year. We'll say that, right? Week 6, 7, and 8 against Detroit, Atlanta, and at Buffalo in primetime. I think they lose all of those games. Week 9 at Houston. I think they finally get their win against the second-year guy in C.J. Stroud. This Tampa Bay team, not to disrespect their defense, as they still have one of the best defenses in the NFL, but they struggle at the biggest position, and that is the quarterback. And there's still also, respectively, questions at the head coaching spot. So I think it takes them a long time to figure it out and a long time to get their first win, but they get it there against the young quarterback in C.J. Stroud. Maybe Vita Vea and this defensive front make it very difficult for a guy like C.J. Stroud. In weeks 10 and 11, they lose to Tennessee, and then in week 11, they lose at San Francisco. At this point, this team is 0-5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They are 1-9 at this point in the year, and it is officially time for Kyle Trask, if it wasn't before this point. So Kyle Trask officially takes over, and we'll say he took over in the second half of week 11 against the San Francisco 49ers. I think he comes in, and as a Gators fan, I'm going to be a little biased. He's going to pick up his first win on the road at the Indianapolis Colts as another young quarterback who's not always the smartest on the field. He's raw. He has a lot of time. He needs to develop there in Anthony Richardson, and he's facing a very veteran defense, a very veteran defensive-minded head coach. I think they're going to be able to confuse this young quarterback and take advantage of him. Get a win there on the road. Kyle Trask's first career win. Week 13, home against the Carolina Panthers. Same song and dance as the C.J. Stroud and Anthony Richardsons. They beat that team as well. They take advantage of the young quarterback, and they split the season series with the Carolina Panthers. And then weeks 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, they realize, hey, Kyle Trask is it was a fun 2 games. I think we'll look back and be like, hey, you remember when Kyle Trask, he had 2 great games and led the Tampa Bay to a couple wins, and he looked like the next guy, and then he quickly mellowed out, right? One of a 2-game wonder, we'll say Kyle Trask could be. But Tampa Bay, 3-14 finish, and this all comes down to just the departure of Tom Brady. The first chapter in any franchise's history after losing an all-time great. In any sport, it's never pretty. LeBron, when he left the Cavs, both times, we sucked. Kevin Garnett, when he left the Timberwolves in 2007, they went on a big playoff drought. Terrell Owens, if we want to talk about football, when he left the San Francisco 49ers in 2004, that team didn't make the playoffs for another 10, 12 years, and they had multiple double-digit loss seasons. It's hard to replace the all-time greats in these sports, in these games, right? Because these players are so great, and they're Hall of Fame level players for a reason. And even past his prime, even though Tom Brady was not the Tom Brady in New England, he still came into Tampa. He left his mark on this franchise. He won them a Super Bowl in his first season with the team, and he's most likely going to have his jersey retired, maybe even a statue, as he only played there a couple of years, but he had a lot of success there in Tampa. He's now gone, officially. At least we think. He might come back at the midseason mark, but he's officially gone now, and the Bucs have gone from Tom Brady to figuring out a quarterback battle between Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. It's not the best camp battle I've ever seen, to say the least. This team struggles mightily in this year just because of that quarterback change, but it might be a blessing in disguise. As I mentioned earlier, a USC quarterback by the name of Caleb Williams, a lot of people think he can be a Patrick Mahomes franchise-changing level quarterback, and you can get him into next year's draft. There's also some guys like Drake May, quarterback out of North Carolina. There's some quarterback options in this next year's draft that could, again, take one step back, and you could get one of these young guys and propel your franchise, take 2 or 3 steps forward, and you still have that veteran roster to compete yet again next season. So Tampa, very weird year, I guess, compared to their time with Tom Brady, but they just don't have the guy at the helm to lead them to the promised land, at least in my opinion. I'll say that. New Orleans here, finishing off in the NFC South. They have an adjustment period. I'll say that. New quarterback Derek Carr. They traded, or he was cut from the Raiders, I believe, and he signed with the Saints. Big 4-year deal. He's here for the long haul. But again, there's going to be that adjustment period. As week 1, week 2, and week 3, I think they lose all 3 games. Week 1 against Tennessee, they lose. At Carolina in week 2, that was a shocker in prime time, but I'm going to go with the rookie in Bryce Young in that one. And then week 3 at Lambeau Field against Jordan Love. Jordan Love's looking to pick up his first career win, and he does that there against the New Orleans Saints, Week 4, they finally get their first win against the division foe on the season in general. Week 4 at home against the Tampa Bay Bucs, they get that win there against Baker Mayfield. Week 5, they go back on the road to Foxborough against New England, and I looked it up this morning. Derek Carr is a 1-4 record against Bill Belichick in his career, and his stats are abysmal. Bill Belichick has had Derek Carr's number for years now, and I think he continues to do that, regardless of who Bill Belichick's quarterback is. So the Saints drop that one. They are at this point 1-4 in the season. And everybody is making fun of the Saints because Derek Carr, you paid him all that money, and he is not doing anything better than what Jameis Winston was doing for these last couple of years. Week 6 at Houston, though, they take advantage of the young C.J. Stroud at the quarterback position. They win that one. Week 7, prime time against Jacksonville. We all know Jacksonville. I might as well move to Duval and say, and become their next biggest fan next to that billionaire. But I think they lose that one to Jacksonville. Week 8, they beat Anthony Richardson, another young quarterback. In Week 9, home against the Chicago Bears, they win that one as well. So at the midseason mark, this team is 4-5. Not the worst record, obviously not the best record, but you have some catching up to do with where a team like Atlanta is at this point in the year. I believe Atlanta was 7-5 at this point. So New Orleans has some catching up to do. Week 10, they lose that one right before their bye week at Minnesota, and they are 4-6 at their bye week. Maybe they can get it going after their break. Well, they're going to have an even harder way to go, as in Week 12 at Atlanta, I think they lose that one as well. as Atlanta this year, I think, is probably the best team in the NFC South. But New Orleans is, at this point, they're 4-7. Maybe at this point, let's just shoot for a good draft pick. But they turn things around. I think they get a big win in Week 13. Detroit is coming off of that Thanksgiving Day win in Week 12 against the Bears. So Detroit, maybe they're head over heels at this point. New Orleans picks up a win at home against Detroit. Week 14, they pick up a win at home against Carolina. Getting things going, getting things in the right direction. Week 15, they pick up a huge win against the New York Giants. That would be the biggest game of the year for them at that point, because if they win that one, they can continue their momentum and make a playoff push. If not, I don't think they have a chance at the playoffs, but I'm going to give them the edge there with Derek Carr at the quarterback and being at home in the Mercedes-Benz Dome. So at this point, you are an even 500 with 3 games to go in the season. You have won 3 straight games. And then you get gifted the Rams late in the year. Week 16 at the Los Angeles Rams Stadium. You pick up a win there against a very brittle Los Angeles Rams team. Week 17 at Tampa. I'm assuming Kyle Trask will be the starter. If that is the case, give me the win for the New Orleans Saints. And then Week 18, again, this can be changed. This can be changed because I'm not sure how this would affect the standings. But as of right now, if the New Orleans Saints are at home against the Atlanta Falcons, I'm going to have them getting the win, finishing this year after a very rocky start to a 6-game win streak. And the New Orleans Saints finish at 10-7 this year. It's no doubt a tale of 2 seasons for this new-look Saints team. And as you can tell, I think the slow start is bound to happen with the new quarterback and with the adjustment period that him and the coach are going to have. So very rocky start to the first half of the year, and that might cost them come playoff time or as far as this division, but I think they get it together and in a big way, as overall they're 1-2 in prime time, 4-2 divisional record, and despite being 4-6 and 4-7 at one point, they win 6 of their last 7 games. And please keep in mind, I'm not the biggest believer in their head coach in Dennis Allen. A lot of people have this team winning 12, 13, 14 games. I don't see it. And regardless of what other people don't see, I think it's going to be a very solid year for the Saints, even if they go 10-7. And the 3 biggest questions I'm looking to be answered this year, and maybe it's not so much on the field, but I guess this first one is, Chris Olave, can he take that second-year superstardom leap? Can he do what a lot of people are projecting Garrett Wilson to do this year? Can he take that second-year superstardom leap at the wide receiver position? That's question number 1. Question 2. Can Michael Thomas play more than 10 snaps, or is he still allergic to actually playing his profession? And the third question is, what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara? Is he going to be traded? Is he going to be moved at the deadline? Is he going to be cut? I want to see how this season is going to play out for Alvin Kamara, as he has his legal issues now. He's going to be suspended at some point in the year. Are they just going to cut him, or are they going to keep him to the end of the year and then get rid of him? We'll have to see what happens with Alvin Kamara. But those are just some 3 questions I have with some of these stars on this offense. Regardless, very solid year for the New Orleans Saints. But here we are at the recap screen. And if you stayed to this point, thank you, right? But in the AFC South, I have Jacksonville winning at 12-5, followed by Tennessee at 4-13. 3-14 is the Texans in the 3rd spot. And rounding out this AFC South, I have the Colts at a abysmal 2-15. Statistically speaking, this AFC South division would be the worst division in the history of the NFL. As of right now, when we look at the worst divisions in the history of the league, I see anywhere between a total of 26 to 28 total wins in the division. And I know math can be hard at times, but as you can tell, I might even want to double check this. 12-4 is 16. You add 3, that's 19, and plus 2 is 21. So as you can see, I think this division will have by far the least amount of wins in NFL history, as they're going to only have 21 total wins. They're going to have 1 good team, and the other teams, a part of it is my hope for them to chase after a guy like Caleb Williams, but this team's going to suck outside of Duval, is basically what I'm saying in short. But some history made, nonetheless. And in the NFC South, I have Atlanta winning the division. So if that Week 18 game comes around, and let's say if New Orleans wins it and they propel to the number 1 seed, then we'll just flip the Week 12 and the Week 18 standing, or the outcomes of those games, as I think I want Atlanta to win this division in a tiebreaker over the Saints. Regardless, same record between the 1 and 2 seed. Atlanta just gets the edge for a tiebreaker. The 3 seed Carolina Panthers, one of the most exciting teams this year. I think they finished at 7-10. Week 4, or not week 4, excuse me. And in the number 4 spot, the Tampa Bay Bucks finish at a 3-14 record, where they figure out Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask are just not the guys going forward. Let's go after one of the young quarterbacks. So that is my recap there for the divisions in the NFC and AFC South. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Quick reminder, if you've made it to this point, that I am opening up a fantasy football league here for the channel. It's going to be a 12-team league, full PPR, standard rosters. We might even add an extra flex or whatever the case may be. All of that stuff will be voted on. Regardless if you're interested in that, go follow my Instagram, which should be on your screen. If not now, in a second, go follow that. Go shoot me a DM and say, hey, I'm interested in joining the league. I can always grab your information and include you in there, as depending on how much interest we get from around the fan base, we will open up multiple leagues if that is the case. Everybody has a chance to get involved if you choose to do so. But that is going to do it for today's show. I will see you guys tomorrow for another draft strategy video, as we went through the zero running back strategy yesterday. Tomorrow, we're going to go through the bully tight end strategy. So that will be a different strategy to look at as we approach draft season. But I will see you guys tomorrow. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy. I'm out.